was the release of a Band-Aid single, which, if you're familiar with the first song you were playing in the build-up. So, sing. Sing it. I've only heard it once, so I'm afraid I can't, and you don't want to hear me sing it. But getting into generalities, I'm the president of the society, this is Emma, the vice president, and before you can see your speakers, what we do at the Debating Society is every Monday at 7 o'clock, we hold a public debate on important, vibrant public social issues like this. And every Thursday, we hold a training session on how to debate. This Thursday's training session is going to be special and fun because it's Christmas and things should be special and fun. We're going to have some debating-related games, the novices amongst us, and for everyone else, we're going to be running 7-minute speeches, which are longer than normal speeches we do in training, which are 5 minutes, and allow you to explore an issue better and talk about it longer, and everyone loves them basically. So that's what we do. Mondays and Thursdays at 7. Someone's getting a text. I'm realising on car radios. Actually, do I really need this? Yeah, it's just aggrandizing yourself. So that's what we do. If you want to come to the Thursday workshops, please buy a membership to the society. It's quite cheap. It'll get you access to so many competitions and amazing training workshops by many of the fine people who see before you. So it's definitely cost effective. You should do it. About tonight's debate, please don't record the debate if you have the urge to do so. We're recording it ourselves and live streaming it. All of these speakers have consented to being recorded by us alone, and we don't want other people recording it and having their recordings because that's a negative thing. As many of you have seen, wine is down below. More wine can be procured, so feel free to have as much wine as you want. I certainly am doing so. Good work. Good. Portion of funds from the audience like that. So the format that we use today, which most speakers are familiar with, but which the audience might be so familiarising, is that everyone speaks for 7 minutes. At 1 minute into each of their speeches, we'll get a bang like that from Vice President Emma. After that point, anyone in the audience or anyone on the opposing side of the debate, proposition or opposition, can offer a point of information to the speaker. That's like a statement or a short question, keep it under 15 seconds if you can, about what the speaker is saying. You do that by standing up in your seat and saying, on that point, or something like that. And the speaker can accept you or they can decline it. Don't feel offended if you're declined. Don't feel obligated to accept, but you should take one if you're feeling supported. It's a great way to engage the debate, and I encourage everyone who thinks something about a speech to offer it up in the form of a point of information. At 6 minutes, we'll get another one bang, and then point of information should no longer be offered. And at 7 minutes in, we'll get another double, 2 bangs, and that means that the speech should begin winding up. Each of the main speakers you see before you will get one of these 7-minute speeches. It'll first happen to the first proposition speaker, and then it'll happen to the first opposition speaker, and it'll go second prop and second op. After we've gone through those main speeches, then the debate will be open to the 5 members of the audience. Anyone who's sitting on those seats can make a floor speech, which is a short 3 minutes or under speech, which you can make. You can make it in proposition of the motion, so saying that you do regret the release of the Band-Aid motion. You can make it in opposition to the motion. You don't regret its release, or you can make it in abstention. Abstaining is where you're not persuaded by either side, you can't fully place yourself on one yet, you're unpersuaded, or you think the debate can't fully be characterised as yes or no, any number of reasons. But that's the third position you can take. After we've got through those 3-minute floor speeches, I'm hoping we can have as many of them as we want to. And I forgot to mention, in a floor speech, the best one of the night will win either a box of chocolates or a bottle of port. So that's another incentive to engage, not just the fun and thrill of speaking, but either drunkenness or deliciousness.
Yeah, you can have deliciousness while drinking the port.
Port isn't delicious. After we've had the floor speeches, then we'll have the summary speeches, during which each side will have 4 minutes to summarise their positions and put the final arguments that they can make to you. And after that, we'll get to the vote, deciding who won this speech. The vote works in a very particular way. We have one vote after the debate, but we also have a vote before the debate to determine how you guys feel when you come into the room, as well as how you feel when you exit it. Because then we can decide how the speakers have persuaded you not just what the room happens to think about any given issue. So in a few seconds, I'm going to hold our first initial vote of what the room initially thinks about regret and release of the mandate motion. But first, I'm going to say that there's one more way you can engage, as well as offering information, as well as the importance to win a brilliant prize. You can tweet. You can see that there's all tweets on the wall already. Tweet with the hashtag UCLU debating, and it will appear up top. You do have a moderation policy, and there is a moderator in the audience, so don't say anything outrageous, but unless you're very reasonable, you can be pretty sure that it will appear on the board. And if you don't want to speak, but you still want to make yourself heard, then you can do it that way. One final thing before we get to the votes. Actually, no, I'll hold the vote. Why not? Yeah. Oh, God. Look, this is a bad thing. I'm sure we'll be able to reform it if we have a little break of the votes. So can I get my 3 volunteers down to come count up what people get voted for? 2 volunteers. Let's see.
I was a mayor.
Need to divide into 2. So they get Clement to the left and Maren to the right.
Oh, okay.
Look, we formed just in time. So, who in this room right now thinks that they're in proposition of this motion? Who does regret the release of the Band-Aid motion? Yeah,
Oh, that's two.
okay, so counting done. Yeah, cool. Right, now, who thinks they're in opposition to this motion? Who doesn't regret the release of the Band-Aid motion? Silly stuff. And lastly, the final position you can take, as a reminder, is in between the 2 it's undecided, it's you don't think it can be binary in that way. Who thinks that they are in abstention to this motion? Who abstains on the motion in this House regrets the release of the Band-Aid motion? Nice. Excellent. We have our highly secret numbers, which you in no way been able to tell by looking around you. And now I'm going to introduce the speakers. So, speaking first in proposition on this motion, we have Aidan Patrick. Aidan is a second-year mathematical computation student at UCL, a successful competitive debater. He's broken as a speaker and judge at multiple university competitions, including SOAS IB, UCL President's Cup, and Bristol Pro. He was personally motivated to participate in this debate due to belief that Bob Geldof's talent as a music producer is distinctly below average. And speaking first in opposition tonight, we have Olivia Sundberg-Diaz. Olivia is currently a program director at DebateMate, an educational charity that seeks to empower children in high-poverty areas. She has previously interned at the Centre for Social Justice, a think tank which aims to put social justice at the heart of British politics, and has also volunteered for the Kenya Project, Oxaid, and World Volunteer. She studied philosophy here at UCL, where she was the president of the Debating Society and a highly successful competitive debater. She's won 5 international tournaments, reached the finals of over 20, I don't have enough hands to do that, and recently ranked as the 6th best team in Europe. So please welcome them here tonight. Speaking second in proposition, we have Kirtana. Kirtana is the current Vice President of the UCLU Medical Society and the Global Health Education Coordinator for UCL Medicine, a student-led global health advocacy. Having studied for a global health BSc last year, she hopes to translate this into her future medical career. Please welcome her tonight. And speaking second in opposition, we have Fletch Williams. Fletch is the advocacy manager for an international NGO that works in international development, gender equality, and human rights. She's worked on development products in Southern Africa and is currently studying for the LLM in human rights at Birkbeck. Please welcome her here tonight. Excellent. Excellent. So one last reminder, wine down here if you want to get some come during the break in the speeches, and a reminder that you can engage by offering a point of information between the single bands, by preparing the full speech, or by tweeting. And with no further ado, can I please ask the first proposition speaker, Mr. Aidan Patrick, to introduce the debate and the proposition arguments.
That's not the joke they can make. Yeah, this is about the size of the crowd I expected for a debate on Bob Geldof. Rubbish. And I don't really need to tell you how bad the song is. I'm going to do that anyway, because it's really bad. I don't want to go and look through it. But the point is that we on Proposition don't stand for regretting every Christmas single designed to raise charity ever. We specifically regret this one song because it was rubbish, and we like another song which is less rubbish and less patronising and less unhelpful to be put out instead. And that would be better than what we had instead, which was this. So let's look at the song. And what I did is I looked at the lyrics that were in the song and I thought, wow. So we're going to look at them together and see what they said. So one of them is, where the only water flowing is the bitter sting of tears. No, there are lots of water flowing. There's the Orange River, there's the Amity River, there's the Poplar River, there's a Nile. And like, it just seems bizarre to me that these rivers weren't considered. It just seems strange. So that's just factually false. Someone should bring this together and tell them actually that's wrong. What else? There won't be snow in Africa this Christmas time. It's also wrong. You go skiing in Morocco. You go skiing in Lesotho. And in South Africa, it snowed. So presumably there's also snow in Africa at Christmas time. That's just, they're not knowing what it is. That's another reason why he's wrong. Then he has, where nothing ever grows. What? Presumably they fed themselves before they met people from the West. So they did grow food, which is fine. No rain or rivers flow. I mean, for the rivers thing, refer to the earlier comments. And as for rain, yes, it rains. As Toto said, we bless the rains down in Africa. And Toto are much better than Bob Geldof. So plausibly, they're the ones you should agree with more than Mr. Geldof. Then the other thing is saying, the title of the song is, do they know it's Christmas time at all? Yes, because it turned out that lots of missionaries went and told them how to be Christian against their will. So yes, there's Christmas time. And many of them are Christians. Presumably they don't need Bobby G to tell them that when Christmas is, because they know when it is, because they follow that religion. That's probably helpful for them. No, they definitely know what it is, Martin. Don't worry. So we think that's unhelpful. And then all in the video, all the suffering they face is they don't have enough water or enough food. And this is true. But this is where the more dangerous part of the song comes in that often the issues that are faced by people in sub-continental Africa or North Africa are not the same as the ones that Mr. Geldof would like you to impose. So most people don't live in the sorts of villages that are on the TV shows. Most people live in urban areas or in slums. The reason they live in those areas is because that's where the jobs are, and that's where the basic state services are for those people. And it's that they need help. What sort of help do they need? They need better sewage infrastructure. It's not sexy, it's quite boring. And that needs to be, I'll tell you in a moment when I get through this. Better sewage infrastructure. They need better energy infrastructure. Rolling blackouts through areas of Southern Africa and areas of North Africa that aren't helped by people not donating money to those services. They need better telecoms so you can phone your doctor when you're sick. Better garbage collection, because the point is that there are such poor conditions that someone needs to pay for that to happen. Better educational infrastructure. And that doesn't happen when people don't give money to those causes. Instead, they buy Band-Aids. Yeah.
So you said that you would prefer a different song. Can you conceive of a top chart single that goes, do the diverse populations of Africa know that what they need is sustainable investment and sewage infrastructure?
I'm not sure what the meter would be for that. But you can also just not sing about that thing and just release a good song and say, oh, we're going to give the money that we get from this good song and give it to those charitable causes. Like on the National Lottery, they don't say, oh gosh, there are people who can't read, so we're going to read them out for them and tell you what the numbers are. No, they just read out the numbers and give the money to people who need it. Children in Need also does all sorts of entertaining things. There could be a good song released, no thank you, by good artists, so not Bob Geldof, and then that money could go to where it's needed. So the point is, a world where those causes are sponsored, as over and above the causes that they talk about, are better. And it's important to notice that what they have to defend on their side is that people wouldn't buy a Christmas single if it didn't patronise Africa. And we suggest that perhaps people would buy a Christmas single because it's quite good, they enjoy it. Steph said that more people would buy it because it sings it in that particular way. Yeah, Martin.
So the specific context of this song was written was in the context of a famine in Ethiopia, where descriptions of nothing growing, for instance, and famine being a thing was painfully accurate.
So that was 30 years ago. Then they re-released it again, the same song. So they haven't evolved their particular methods. Maybe it'd be nice to release a different song. But even if that isn't true, the fact that they keep releasing it has further filled into that story of what it is. So why wasn't there as much money as there could have been? And why did it go to wrong places? Firstly, it's a really bad song, and people tend to buy better songs as opposed to songs they dislike. So if you make a better song, i.e. not one that's Bob Geldof, or by better artists, they're typically more likely to buy that song, which means more money goes to that particular thing. It also makes Christmas karaoke really unpleasant, because about 2 drinks in, someone's like, oh, why don't we sing the Band-Aid one? And I'm like, no, it's just really unpleasant. You get less money. But the other problem is you get what's called emotional fatigue, when people keep seeing these images on television over and over again, and it detracts from other more helpful causes, because there's sort of a race to the bottom who can be the most emotional. So when you see those television analysts or war tapes, and it's unpleasant because everyone's had that uncle who's like, oh, well, they don't really need our help, there's all the television and so on and so forth. That's unhelpful, because money doesn't go to those places, and money isn't where it's needed to be. So other causes get less money because those particular things aren't talked about. So not only do you get less money overall, but the causes that are important, the causes that people really need, aren't funded, because instead you listen to something that's what you think is important. So what we would rather is a song that doesn't patronise the entire continent of Africa, but a song that is released with the same intentions, but is merely seek to be an entertaining medium that people can enjoy, purchase that single, and then that money can go to charities that can help far better than Mr. Geldof and his personal campaign.
Thank you, Aidan, for that excellent first speech in favour of proposition. And now I'd like to invite the first speaker from opposition, Olivia, to take the floor.
Sorry, I'm busy with the rules that you gave on
That's one. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that was help.
Thank you. Sorry. There are only 2. I'll give you the more full one if you're happy.
I've never been here. It's fine.
Alright. Ready? Cool. So, proposition so far has been quite unclear about what it is that they have to defend in this debate. This is understandable, because their position is frankly indefensible. So I'm going to clear this up for them, right? It is not enough for Aidan to stand up and say, well, you know, it's a very annoying song, but the most important problem we have is that it didn't solve decades or centuries even of world poverty in an entire continent. Let me just point out, Aidan has not solved centuries of oppression and poverty in an entire continent. I don't regret Aidan. This is not a good enough reason to regret something, okay? What Band-Aid was meant to be was a Band-Aid for a systematic, short-term problem, which was Ebola, which was a famine that nobody was doing anything about. If we can prove that it did something about it when nothing else was happening, we will. I hope that's clear. What proposition have to regret is they have to regret £250 million going to charitable organizations in countries where there was famine and in countries where Ebola was taking place. We say that that is unfeasible. So firstly, I'm going to do 2 things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to respond to the entirety of Aidan's material on why this is patronizing and it contributes to a bad perception of Africa. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the benefits that Band-Aid brought, why we think those benefits are crucial, why we think it's really, really important, and we should not regret it. So, 5 reasons why Aidan is wrong about the narrative that this has about Africa, right? Firstly, he says the lyrics are bad. Let's be clear, obviously the lyrics are bad. The reason that the lyrics are bad is that it was written in a scramble. It was written because people thought, hey, there's an emergency, no one is doing anything about it. Let's take 24 hours to record and write the entirety of this song so we can get as much money as possible. Obviously it's going to be bad. We would rather that that happened than that they waited half a year to write it to get like as much money as possible, because people died in that year. That was the nature of the conflict and the time when it was written. Then Aidan says, the problem is that it continued to use the lyrics from the famine at the point that there was no longer a famine. I mean, this is blatantly untrue. Like, the latest song in 2014 is about Ebola. Like, it's completely different. They've removed references to hunger in Africa. They've like removed all the references to 1980s Africa, which was quite different to the way that it is now. No, you had your chance. Secondly, though, he says, oh, the problem is that it changes people's perceptions for the worse because you see so many images and you get desensitized. I mean, let's be clear. The world in which proposition happens is still a world in which you have every other charitable organization trying to push these images in front of your face. So this realistically doesn't make a difference. I don't think it changes anyone's behavior and determines whether anyone is going to invest in infrastructure in Africa or not, if they've listened to this song or not. I think investors probably have other considerations, like reports, you know? But we think for other people, people that are otherwise not engaged, people that don't care, people that don't know anything, it opens up a huge discussion, right? It brings up awareness to problems like the famine that are taking place, and people are dying, and people need immediate help, right? That's the third point. But also, fourthly, note, it does open up a huge discussion, right? It isn't true that people just automatically accept this message and think, yeah, everyone in Africa is dying. Right now, there is literally no rivers in Africa, right? But we say that what actually happens is that when you get this platform for issues that otherwise get no platform whatsoever, you also get a lot of criticism. Yes, a lot of people hate Bob Geldof as a result of this song. That doesn't mean that like you still have more donations and you can still criticize these messages. No, but Emily Sandé, who's one of the singers that participated in the latest Band-Aid single, has stood up from the platform that she got from participating in the single and criticized it and said, obviously we need better lyrics. Obviously this isn't representative. It's still an important message and it still brings net awareness to people that otherwise just don't know what's going on in Africa. Yes.
Why can we have a different song with lyrics that weren't the ones that I talked about?
Okay, cheers, thanks, Aidan. The problem is that at no point have Proposition proven a link between having this song, which means that now we're not going to have a better song. If they could do that, sure, we would concede that maybe this could have been better and they could have achieved all of the successes of this campaign without having the song. Until they have done that, we still win. On the comparative, what we think realistically happens, and this is my fifth response to Aidan, is that when you have a world without Band-Aid, you have a world where nothing kicks the world out of inertia, right? Firstly, you have less engagement because you just don't have this platform. We should talk to people about it. You're not going to have a #1 single that talks that sewage in Africa, right? So that's just the case. You have to make it short. You have to make it snappy. To some extent, you have to generalize. Not that this happens in Christmas when you're competing with advertising that is promising to make your life incredibly happy, when it's trying to get you to spend on things for yourself. It's really difficult to try to encourage people to spend that money on charity. It is amazing that Band-Aid managed to get any money at all, let alone £250 million. On that comparative, we would much rather having something kickstarting the discussion, something kickstarting these donations, right? On their side, nothing happens, which means that we have less engagement with charity overall, but also, and this is really crucial, and this is the bulk of our case, you have no short-term help for people that really, really need it, right? So let's move on to the second point. What is it that we think on our side of the house Band-Aid achieved that was absolutely exceptional? 4 things. Firstly, it managed an extremely quick response to a pressing problem, right? As even Martin said in the POI, this existed in a context in which there was famine in Ethiopia, right? For political causes, for the government like having awful policies in the midst of a civil war and refusing to protect people that were its own citizens because they were the opposition and allowing them to starve to death. No one was doing anything about this. And you needed somebody in some organization to stop this, like step in and say, yes, this is a government, yes, this falls within their sovereignty. We are still going to donate money to save these people. No, thanks, no. We say that this is important, and it was important that you had a quick response because there hadn't been any so far. Secondly, as I pointed out, it wasn't Christmas. This was really difficult to push for any sort of charitable donation. The fact that they did that, so they could compete with all of the other consumers' campaigns, is amazing. And yes, that does mean that they had to generalize. Thirdly, note that until that point, you've never had any comparable movement of getting so many celebrities in one go. Note that there's been over 200 celebrities getting involved with this project from the outset, getting together and making one piece of charity work together, right? This is crucial because it meant that every single, the entirety of the fan base of all of these celebrities could now get behind it, admire those celebrities, follow their fan pages, follow their interviews, follow their appearance in magazines and say, I want to be like them. I'm going to donate to this cause because I care. And lastly, for similar reasons, this led to huge media attention, this led to interviews, this led to films about it, this led to other people doing similar things. So even if you don't like this cause, presumably similar causes that happened afterwards as a result. All of these benefits happened. It changed the way that things were being done by that context in a crucial way that simply would not have happened without it. Let's be very specific then about the two contexts that we're talking about. Firstly, as I said, we're talking about the famine in Ethiopia in 1984. As I said, for political causes, people were not doing anything about it. People were not donating emergency aid to save the lives of thousands. What Band-Aid did was they raised £150 million exclusively for that purpose, exclusively for ending the famine. And that was really, really important in terms of saving lives. But what it also did is it caused a huge galvanization of people. It said, listen guys, charity is important. We have to think of other parts in the world. We have to care about this. It put huge pressure on governments to deal with the sustainable problems that Aiden cares about, to deal with things like sewage, because people cared about it much, much more than they did otherwise. Similarly with Ebola, what they needed was more money for more beds in hospitals. What they needed was to pay doctors for a place to stay so that they could cure people. What they needed was money to ensure better security to stop the disease from spreading. They did not need a narrative that Aiden cares about this.
Thank you to Olivia for that excellent opening speech in opposition to our motion. I hope everyone's cooking up their floor speeches, because now we're getting to the second speech in proposition of this motion. I invite everyone to welcome Keats to the floor.
So, I'd like to thank Olivia for pretty much setting the premise of my entire argument and rebuttal. And actually, as you said, that we don't need the narrative for Ebola, I actually think that's a pretty good example of how maybe the signature highlighted the fact that it was years and years of systemic oppression, subjugation, and colonialism that led to a system where these countries were ill-equipped to deal with a health crisis like Ebola. So we've spoken about how Aiden himself has resolved decades of world poverty. Aiden is not a multi-millionaire, nor is he friends with lots and lots of multi-millionaires. It's quite funny, isn't it? How I mean, maybe one day, but not now. I find it quite ironic that, these groups of fashionable multi-millionaires, they only have to donate their time, 24 hours of time actually. It's the rest of us peasants that have to donate our money to Africa. If you're a celebrity, just give your time, it's fine. When we're talking about short-term problems like famine, again, famine is never a product of a short-term problem. I would actually argue that here, Band-Aids don't work over centuries of historical context of colonialism, slavery, and subjugation of people based on their skin colour. Like, when as the West, you've plundered nations over years and years of their natural resources and taken away their dignity, I would say famine is actually a pretty damn long-term consequence of this.
You do know that Bob Geldof is Irish, right?
Ireland was also part of, still part of the West. Ireland's not a separate nation to the West. We're all kind of complicit in each other. I'll get on to this in a second. I'll take your point in a second. But we are all equally complicit in this. I don't think you can isolate yourself from this issue by claiming to be a particular race over another. So, I'm actually I think the fact that this was written in 24 hours should be taken as an insult. Was this the only amount of time that we could give? 24 hours of our time after, like I said, centuries and centuries of oppression. Now, you're right, you're absolutely right. They didn't continue using the same lyrics. They actually used worse lyrics for Ebola, where they referred to physical contact between people with Ebola as being the kiss of death and tears of death. At a time where we actually had a platform to educate and enable and empower people about this issue that, on a global domain actually terrified many Westerners. Not really cared so much about the Africans in that instance. We only gave ZMAP to Westerners, but never mind. I think this was actually quite a disgusting abuse of power, where you use lyrics such as kiss of death to promote your own ideology. Now, I do fundamentally agree with you that you say that this single is a way of engaging people who don't necessarily care and aren't engaged with this issue. And you're right, I think a lot of you, the pragmatist one of you, will be yeah, it's fine for us to all sit here and have this intellectual waffle about, was it morally right, was the lyrics right? You're right, it fundamentally raises an immense amount of money, and at the end of the day, isn't that surely what's good? However, I would argue that whilst we might think good intentions are better than no intentions, and some money is better than no money, I argue that some of the worst things that have ever happened have been fueled by good intentions, and money in that direction is the perfect catalyst for said awful things to happen. So, Geldof himself, none of us are a fan of Geldof. Sorry.
So, even if a famine where 8 million people are at risk of dying is a consequence of long-term systemic problems, does that still put a burden for someone to resolve the short-term manifestation when it is worse, and then resume long-term solutions when you have saved 8 million people's lives?
Did they save 8 million people's lives? No, they didn't. They actually, in fact, I would like beg anyone to tell me where exactly does the money from the Band-Aid single go? To Africa, that homogenous nation where all the problems are the same. And I'm not like none of us, like all of us like in this room, I would say like everyone likes to keep themselves quite enlightened. We do a lot of reading and stuff. I like to think like, you know, like I like to think I keep myself educated. Through like a casual Google search, I can't tell you where this money from the Band-Aid single goes.
Question? So if you go on the Band-Aid 30 website, it will tell you that it went to a large of grassroots charities that were underfunded, all of which were working with both the short-term and the long-term sustainable problems of Ebola, or the famine.
Which are now clearly interchangeable problems with each other. I would argue that seeing as the Summit Tree lives 20 years later, and actually like just giving money towards the famine situation doesn't actually change the systemic problems that then have enabled further poverty and lack of growth in GDP with Ethiopia, which I will get on later. I'm not saying that raising money is a bad thing. No one here on Proposition is saying, my God, the fact these people raised money was awful. Why it is so awful is something I'll come on to now. Now, firstly, once that problem happened with Geldof, yeah, he's awful, he's an awful music producer. My main problem is the way he reacts when his motivations are questioned. Now, as someone who's quite interested in global health, I think like if any charitable organisation gets petty and gets abusive when their motivations are questioned, it's a bit suspicious. And like they should be transparent. It should be made exceptionally clear where the money is going. I accept Olivia says that she knows where it's going, but at the same time, Geldof didn't start personally attacking Adele for not being in the single, despite the fact that, you know, she just had a kid. Adele had, however, made a very large private donation to Oxfam. I guess it's like that philosophical dilemma, isn't it? Like, if a tree falls, like, and no one's around to hear it, it didn't make a sound. So, like, nowadays, like, if you donate a load of money, but you didn't make a scream, make a big song and dance about it, does it count? It's kind of like the celebrity equivalent of, like, Instagramming a meal you have with friends, as opposed to, like, enjoying your life, like, in your own time. So, my issue here is, in reference to Olivia's point before about how the Band-Aid single has united celebrities, it's actually massively damaging that we associate celebrities that wear the perceived struggles of Africa like a trendy new fashion accessory with doing good. My issue is we very much should care about the motivations behind why the single was released, because the most important issue is where does the money go and why is it given in that way? As I said before, to Africa. Like I said, clearly it's now a homogenous nation where a kiss of love can kill you and there is death in every tear. 2014 people, these are not acceptable lyrics to be having. Medically incorrect, and also they're just not nice, are they? Not great. And let me be clear that when we talk about these similar causes, we are talking about causes that affect people that aren't like us or live in our circumstances. Africa is actually a continent full of diversity, culture, natural resources, and talent. It's a shame Bob Geldof doesn't attract them to sing in a single or promote singles sung by local African singers to promote money for their own culture. Band-Aid only elicits a short-term response that correlates directly with our mandated sense of charity, aka the run-up to Christmas, where we use our own privilege or sanctimoniousness to buy an average record with a hideous message, without even knowing where the money goes. Is this sustainable? Sustainable as Western guilt is sustainable. It's fair enough. I've never heard of Band-Aid money propelling any African economy to the dizzying heights of sustainability. I have heard of micro-investments and loans from various governments being given in regions where roads and physical infrastructure are rebuilt. Let's be clear, there's no pretense of altruism there. It's done with the aim of increased trade. But that's what's needed. Less pity, and a bit more recognition of the vast inherent resources and qualities Africa has to be a serious player on the global stage. I mean, we didn't have such a problem recognizing our natural resources when the flow of trade was significantly more one-sided during the colonial era. I could go on for ages and ages, but I think that's all the time I have.
Thank you to Keith for that excellent closing speech in opposition. And if I can now invite Fletch to come up and give the second speech for the opposition side.
In several debates, I've watched speakers from various universities introduce themselves in culturally appropriate languages for the debate. So, or alternatively, so I just spoke then in Sesotho, a language of Southern Africa, and also in Irish, because despite the fact that we've been told continuously by the proposition that we shouldn't group all African countries together, I'd like to mention that the previous speaker only talked of African culture and did not refer to any African country by name. But we equally can also refer to the West, it seems, in the nebulous group. Ireland, I'd like to remind you, the home of Bob Geldof, the victim of the third biggest man-made famine in the entirety of history, whose global current population would be over 80 million if that had never happened. So the idea that, oh, and by the way, the British did that, I would say that the idea that Ireland is therefore nebuliously grouped in with all post-colonial powers is probably a little inaccurate, unfair, and unfortunately reflects the glibness and lack of nuance given to us by the entirety of the proposition. I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about responsibility and how we allocate responsibility. And I also want to talk about why we can regret something, because I don't think we've looked at that either very well this time. So let's look at regret the first time around. So to fairly assess whether the Band-Aid single is regrettable, and we, of course, got a couple of Band-Aid singles. We've got the one in 1984, which is about the Ethiopian famine, a historical thing that happened at that point in time. It was between 1983 and 1985, where, by the way, for the first time ever, images of starving children were broadcast on British television news, not Race to the Bottom charity adverts, not in this charity single video, but on the news, that this is the first time we'd ever seen this, and it truly shocked the nation. So why is that relevant to this debate? To understand whether it's regrettable, we think we need to understand the motivations and reasons for why the single was released in the first place. So the story goes that two people, not just Bob Geldof, but also Midge Ure, a Scottish musician, saw this and were really affected by the images that they saw on TV. This had never been seen before. People literally did not know about the kind of development issues that confronted most of Africa, let alone were asked within 24 hours to come up with a nuanced sustainability plan for the entirety of a continent in response to one famine. Okay, so what they did is they tried to do something that they could do. And it is not reasonable to expect someone, just because they're rich and just because they write songs, to engage with centuries worth of systematic oppression. What you're actually complaining about there is how the media talks about problems in sub-Saharan Africa, on the eastern coast, how they talk about no thank you, the Rwandan genocide, and all of these sorts of problems. What you're talking about is a mass media problem, not two lads sitting in a room trying to write a song to make a difference and save people's lives. They raised over £8 million, and I think that is not worth snubbing at. Maybe they didn't do it in the best way, but they did it, and no one else would have in the circumstances, sure.
I think, again, as we said, the issue is not that they raised so much money. Like, nobody is raising anything past a brilliant amount to raise.
Right.
Is this song, perhaps I didn't phrase it well, is it not more symptomatic of the fact that we had to write such patronising lyrics to raise £1 million? We don't regret the single because two people, misguided or not, had the ideology of raising money.
Right.
We regret the single.
I'm sorry, it's my speech, not your speech. So, the point there, like all the lyrics that you mentioned, I know Aidan had some to do with the first single, and I think that we've already heard about why they were accurate to that one specific circumstance, although probably could have been changed. I'm still not going to regret the release of the single first off. In terms of the Ebola single, yeah, they probably also could have done that better. But the motivations are good, and they would not have had the results that they otherwise would have. Remember that the results of this fundraising went to grassroots charities who would never have had that money. They did not have access to the public in our country, in other countries, in America, in Ireland, in France, in many, many other places, where people felt like they wanted to do something. So if we're going to talk about power, let's not only not misallocate the power to musicians and tell them that they should be solving global trade problems and global politics problems, but also look at the power and the reasons for that other people in the public want to help, right? Most people see this on the news, or they see it in adverts, they see it in whatever way they do, and they want to make a difference. And if they want to make a difference, one of the easiest ways that they can do that is to donate money. And one of the ways that they felt that they could do this is donate money to the specific single because they felt like they knew where it was going. One of the reasons why they felt like they knew where it was going is because they can look it up on the internet and find out exactly where we're going. That's what Olivia's told you. She's told you where this money's going. It's not really a problem on that front. What Prop is telling you repeatedly is not only should this innovation, and by the way, this single, when released in 1984, changed the surface, changed the world of charity fundraising forever. We would not have comic relief today if it weren't for Band-Aid. We would not have had the Band-Aid concert, where if you talk to your parents, if you talk to older people that you may know, this country literally stopped for a day to pay attention to the global problems that this world has, particularly in developing countries, and we would not know about them, and we wouldn't talk about them at all, no thank you, if it were not for the actions that they've taken. Now that's very easy to forget 20 or 30 years later, as we've seen. But it should not be underestimated, and it shouldn't be manipulated because who we actually want to blame for these problems are less visible, there's more of them, and they don't put themselves out there trying to make a real difference. So what we're saying, what we've heard from Proposition instead, is that not only should this not have happened, but in part that it would have been better if it hadn't, or alternatively, they should have done it better. Doing it better is not the same as regretting. This motion is regretting the release of the single. We perhaps regret the way that it's been done some of the time. It could have been done better. But that's the wonderful thing about self-reflection and moving forward. You don't have to undo all of the good stuff. You can build upon it and make it better. And that's the kind of thing that we want to put forward on opposition today. So ironically, this simplistic song that has good intentions has been disproportionately held up to be responsible for the things it could not have been responsible for, and for consequences it could not have possibly foreseen, all in the name of good intentions of the proposition. Unfortunately, they're unfounded. I beg to oppose.
Thanks to Fletch for that very fine opposition speech and the last of our main speeches. So now I'm going to get you cool speeches. A warning about our Twitter. After a while, your tweets will stop showing up there at a high amount of volume which you get in a moment, because we're only allowed 30 tweets. So if you've got something to say, come down and say it in the floor speech. I urge everyone who can. It's a great thing to do, and there are great prizes. So again, you can be proposition, opposition, or abstention, and that's the order I'll go through. Can I get someone in this audience? Then no one can say it now. Can I get someone who's willing to give a proposition to a speech? A speech which regrets the release of the mandated. I can't refuse such an eager answer. So come down.
Not that I'm wobbling.
Do you want wine?
So I'm not here to meet the burden that Olivia said on Aidan to suggest better songs, because yes, there have been better charity songs. I think We Are the World is fantastic. But I actually just want to use this time to tell you about something that was a very unfortunate consequence of this single. And I think to the extent that the release of this single was so groundbreaking, it had such a big impact the opposition talked about, I do think that the issue of this single and the way it was released actually bears more responsibility for the way this happened. So let's go back to the context of the famine in Ethiopia. What we had was a really oppressive state, and a really oppressive state tended to misallocate all the resources given by state aid. So the inertia that existed in that context existed because states didn't trust the government with it, so no state was prepared to act. So when Band-Aid acted and raised lots and lots of money, it fed the money into this very autocratic regime. Now, initially this seemed to be a really good idea because we funded local charities. The problem is, charity status is something that can be given very, very easily. And the way this panned out very rapidly was that they created new special villages. These special villages were semi-modern and very semi-well designed. Initially there was food in them, and they were able to resolve that. As a consequence, the Ethiopian government and several other oppressive governments in Africa, at the point when we got a steady cash flow, instead of government interaction that actually was more sustainable than what we had before that, started creating this kind of system. And what did that mean? That meant that people living in slums, people living in refugee camps, were forcefully moved because the government needed to take people to put in these nice places, because only when these villages were populated could they actually get more money from more such villages. Given they were able to claim some of the money for themselves or save some of the money through corruption, they would all have incentive to get more of those villages. What that also meant was that people didn't want to move because they had family, because they had friends, because they had roots in that area, were killed, were tortured, were brutalized, were incarcerated, or had other pressures upon them. So the dependency on these regimes, on this money, was not just this random, oh, they weren't sustainable enough, but it actually became something that started to make them force people to live in places where they didn't want to live, and live in places where they had no long-term commitment. So you move people from one hellish context to another hellish context where they no longer had at least a basic security of having a community around them that they could trust, having like whatever institution they had around them that they could trust. Now, I know that this feels patronizing to very often talk about people in a crisis as having very little and going from little to worse. And I do recognize it's probably very good that so many money was raised. But the way that such massive amounts of money was raised in the very short term, and it wasn't done in a way where, for instance, the concerts that were used afterwards were also used as protest, a way of putting pressure on the government to make sure that these new countries, actually the receiving countries, were forced to change their legislation, the way they acted with this money, created a bigger problem than the problem that existed before. That is regrettable, and therefore we should actually regret the issue of the Band-Aid single.
Thank you to Martin for a great opening speech to begin our floor speeches. Can I now get a counterpoint? Can I now get a floor speech, 3 minutes or less, in opposition to this motion? Is there anyone who wants to step up or hand up and come down to give a opposition floor speech, please?
I'd just like to just add a note on the speaker who came before me, but villageization in Eastern Africa is not something that came out of Live Aid. It just isn't. We see examples of these projects in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, South Sudan, and progressively. But these projects are things that were institutions that came before and came afterwards. What didn't come before was financial support for institutions in Africa, the African Union, which got a huge amount of funding from Live Aid. And actually, what Live Aid is really about is awareness. The money is, by the by, it's been kind of dissolved into Africa in many ways. And it's been helpful to gift money to NGOs because that was a means to an end. But the real crux of Live Aid has been to make the world aware of, so the world was aware of poverty in Africa, yes. But Africa as a continent has come together before and done big conferences like this. Africa in 1976 did a similar kind of thing, supporting community-led development in Africa at the time of independence. It's not new. But Africa, in this sense, was alone, and it had to play with Cold War power. Now, African development has become the centre of a global debate about our communal economic development, which is why we now see China, the UK, Germany, and the US being very, very involved. But this doesn't come from nowhere. There must be political support. That's why the most important element of the Band-Aid single has been Live Aid, has been Live 8, and has been the response to the Ebola crisis. No, these initiatives did not solve these issues. But why would a government in the West act to support sustainable development if there wasn't any political incentive at home? That is why these are important initiatives. And yes, they are flawed, but there are an energy to get behind in order to support sustainable development investment and the development of Africa, not towards, sorry, I'm not very good at debating. Not towards Western goals, but just towards a more cooperative vision of how this world can work. Yeah.
Thanks for that excellent opposition speech. You are very good at debating. Two very good speeches, actually. Is anyone willing to put themselves up abstention floor speech of the night? Ooh, I have a hand up there. Please come down.
I don't really do much debating. I'm an archaeologist and every week I have indigenous archaeology, probably we'll get over that. And we generally learn about the colonial legacy. I feel like we're talking about very sort of short-term issues here. And I think that in a sense, Band-Aid's quite telling in that it's patching up the issues, not actually doing anything sort of deeper about it. So I'm abstaining not because I regret that money has been raised and lives have undoubtedly been saved by this initiative. I regret the fact that we sort of see it as a sort of charitable duty rather than something that's sort of part of a wider international effort. Because I think that the UN has its problems, but I would rather be able to place our trust in the UN and international bodies than of Geldof. So I think that there are lots of problems with the Band-Aid song that's sort of been gone over with, but I mean, for me, I think the lyrics, less so about sort of accuracy, but I think they do sort of perpetuate this sort of Kipling idea of bearing a white man's burden, the idea that they're helpless people who live. Well, I remember actually, not the last one, the one before then. I busted in it. I was quite small, and remembering why do they live in Africa if there's no rain there? Why do they live in this place that has no resources and value? It seems it essentially dehumanizes it and sort of perpetuates this colonial narrative we all need to be working to sort of remove. Someone put a tweet saying that food is more important than narrative. Yes, but it's still looking at sort of short-term issues and not helping with long-term ones. Because it is sort of a band-aid, it is a plaster, we're just patching it up. If we actually wanted to help this Christmas, then perhaps the climate talks we could have had a much more satisfactory result than the one we had that is going to affect a lot of the countries within the continent of Africa and elsewhere. Perhaps in terms of mineral resources, we could, rather than spending loads of money on smartphones, tablets that are all using conflict minerals, we'd actually be looking to not just go for lots more of this rapid consumerism that is damaging these places. And I think sort of just buying a charity single to make yourself feel better, in a way, it is having a negative effect, but you can just sort of spend a small amount of money on a charity single and then it's going to be all right, you kind of done your bit. So, yeah, I can't really sort of say that I regret that it's sort of raised money and has had some limited impact, but I also think that it is endemic with larger problems. Thank you.
Thank you to that abstention speaker. We've had so many so good speeches and a high proportion of interest from everyone here that I'm gonna, if there's interest, go for a second round of them. So, to try it out, is anyone in here wanting to give a floor speech in proposition to this motion? Anyone want to say that they regret the Band-Aid symbol? Looks like I'm gonna have to take someone else from the corporate block there. Yeah. Shirted man, bring that.
Yeah, go for it.
Good there?
Whatever I say here doesn't represent my corporation or my company, only represents my own opinion. Right. Okay, so I am basically the ideal for somebody who gives to charity. The reason being is about a few years ago, I was quite drunk at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon because I'm an alcoholic. As it turns out, a very, very pretty girl walks up to me and goes, "Do you want to give money to charity?" And I think to myself, well, I've got a good chance here of giving money to charity and nothing else at all. As it turns out, I end up, because of this girl, giving money to charity in the long term. And it means that every single month I donate 10 to 15 pounds to charity. And I've increased it every single year because I might as well, I don't want to guilt trip me too much. The reality is, though, that allows charities to long-term plan a lot better than anything else. It means that over time, the charities sit there and they go, "Hey guys, we've got this consistent cash coming in, which means we can prevent things from happening before they ever happen to begin with." Ultimately, this is like the ideal thing for charities because it costs so much less to prevent crises from happening than it does to cure them after the fact. Band-Aid is a great thing for curing something after the fact. Unfortunately, what it did is it created the concept that if there is ever a crisis, we can just raise a ton of cash and make it go away. The 250 mil is great, right? It's a wonderful thing to have. But 50 mil over a 10-year period is much better at preventing any long-term crisis from ever happening. The reality is that what Band-Aid did is incentivize the idea that one-off donations are in fact the solution to long-term crises in these regions. And it meant that in the eyes of the British public, and in the eyes of the people in general, they could simply sit back, relax, and then when there was a very, very large campaign, give a large amount of money afterwards, right, to then deal with that problem. Ultimately, Band-Aid's one greatest flaw is it stopped long-term charity donations over the next 10 years and meant that they were significantly lower than they otherwise would have been, massively hurting the charities involved. Go for it, man.
If that is true, why are you and very many other people immune to that and actually give these monthly donations?
Because charities obviously campaign separate to Band-Aid and like, right? But obviously all that kind of stuff does happen. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a negative impact on the campaigning that they do. If I had given money to Band-Aid and this girl had walked up to me and gone, do you want to give? I'd be like, no, I already spent money, right? The entire point is the negative impact that a single donation has on people's incentive to give long-term donations over a long period of time and just forget about them, because that's what people do, is so detrimental to long-term development and long-term aid in these societies that you ultimately have to regret Band-Aid, because it keeps happening every 10 years. Every 10 years it keeps on impacting all of these. So I beg you to propose the next motion.
A great second floor speech in proposition. So, as you know, it's time for a floor speech in opposition. Most of the speeches we've had so far have been 3 minutes, full speeches, but they don't have to. If you just want to make a short statement, feel free to come down to make that. If you don't feel like a full speech. So on that note, can I get a floor speech in opposition to this motion? Someone who's willing to say that they do not regret the release of the Band-Aid motion. Again, opposition floor speech. Or a little opposition statement, a little opposition question. Anyone who characterizes themselves as opposition wants to say something. Yeah, please come down. Ginger.
Sorry.
thanks for that great floor speech in opposition. And if I can get now a floor speech, final of the trio and final of the night, to speak in abstention. Can I get someone who's willing to abstain on this motion, to argue either for or against, but somewhere in the middle? Anyone out there who has a hand? Is that a hand?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
I'm not just
Shocking
like
gesture.
right.
Please stand up.
Okay. I'm fine with that. So, basically a couple of things. Firstly, on the idea of awareness, and secondly, on whether we can do something to make the situation in Africa better. Just starting off with that because it makes it so much easier if I forget it, later on. But firstly, on awareness, now we sort of agree that people only really donate because it makes them feel better, right? They don't actually do it because they really give a crap about the situation in Africa. They do it because they feel, I've given money to help people in need, therefore, I'm a better person about it. So it's the question of whether we do actually need to raise awareness about the situation in Africa as long as we can get people to give money, right? Because the situation is, for example, a lot of drives to raise money is not so much about raising awareness of the situation, it's about actually getting people to give funds. Like, does it really matter at the end of the day whether they're more educated people, whether people focus on celebrities releasing the Band-Aid single versus the actual situation within Africa? Or is it the fact that we actually get money from people and we can use this money for charitable causes? Yeah, sure.
So Africa has tons of resources, they're just not necessarily managed in the best way. There's a lot of outside influences. Though actually I don't think it's true at all that money is the most important thing over the narratives or structures.
Yeah, but you see, I agree. I think that is to do with the way money is managed. The problem is, even if you try to raise the awareness of people, right, most of the people whose awareness do need to be raised are the people who fundamentally probably don't care that much about solving the problem in Africa, or are that well educated, or that enthusiastic to actually go out and try to resolve the institutional problems within it in the first place. So the thing is, we're talking about the accuracy of the lyrics, or whether we should have people learn more about the situation within Africa. In fact, at the end of the day, it's not those people who necessarily focus on the Band-Aid single who are the ones who can actually go out or are willing to go out and make a difference. So it's a question of, is the Band-Aid single that much about raising people's awareness? And even if it is, does it make a difference at the end of the day?
Well, thank you for that great floor speech and abstention. And now that we've got the floor speeches, we're going to work out who won the floor speech. But before we can announce that, we first have the summary speeches for each side. Opposition speaks first, and then proposition. Each of the sides have 4 minutes between them. So some of them like to have one speaker lead all, some of them like to split it equally. So how we signify is that we bang once at 2 minutes to show if you're switching, switch to your partner now. And then we bang twice at 4 minutes to say your time is up. So that's how it works. And as I said, opposition speaks first. So please welcome the opposition side in whatever order.
So the proposition side of today's debate was based on 3 claims. The first one is that we should regret Band-Aid because they did not do enough. First thing I'd like to point out is that that seems like a pretty bad reason to regress, right? It feels to me, just to start with, like what proposition should say is that more Band-Aid would be a bad thing, not that more Band-Aid would be a good thing. That seems like a fairly odd stance for them to take. We think they've conceded a lot of their case on that point. But what we also point out is that, if you don't find £250 million enough, it also led to a lot of long-term positive outcomes. It led to more awareness. It led to positive things like, songs like the one that Martin mentioned, We Are the World, came across as a result of the inspiration of Band-Aid, showing that celebrities can take an active role in charity and through music lead to positive outcomes. It's interesting that a lot of floor speakers said, we'd sooner trust the UN, or governments would be better. Because the fact is that firstly, governments were not being better. Governments were not acting. That is why we needed Band-Aid. That was the problem they were solving. But secondly, a lot of institutions like the UN, other fantastic charities, were the ones that benefited from the money that was directed to Band-Aid, thanks to Band-Aid, through their awareness they promoted. So we don't buy that point. The second claim is that Band-Aid makes us feel good and that it's bad because we get complacent. And 2 different claims were made. The first one is that because we've made mistakes in the past through colonialism, we should not come across as the good guys now. I find it bizarre that the fact that we were colonialists means that we should be absolved of any moral responsibility now to try to do the good thing, because we might come across as the good guys. That seems like an odd moral stand for me to take. But secondly, they say, like Zal said, oh, but this means that we're not going to donate to long-term charities. Again, this is weird. The way that Banding and all other charities operate is they get you to make a short-term donation because they know that that engages you. Because then they send you down like newsletters. Because then they update you. Because then they know that you take an interest in whatever you've invested yourself in. And you're more likely to get long-term donations. The final thing is that there's long-term harmful issues. We agree with that. We agree that it wasn't perfect. We agree that charity donations often lead to harmful actors and actions, in particular if we are donating to dictators. The point is, this is not Band-Aid's fault. This is not a reason not to donate to charity. This is a reason for other actors to also take the responsibility they have and play the roles that they should play. For these reasons, I propose.
And now, excellent. Don't clap, it gives me less time to speak. Okay, so basically, I spoke about in my speech the idea who should be responsible for what, and this is probably a misallocation of responsibility, but we're regretting this. What I got from you guys speaking in the floor speeches was that you were very interested in sustainable development as an alternative to Band-Aid. Shocker, you can have both. We think that those two things alongside each other might be particularly effective because despite the idea of that was expressed that we don't like having short-term cash injections for crises, that's exactly what crises needs. That's when governments at times of crisis will say, please give us a cash injection now, and also do the long-term sustainable development solutions that will help us in the long term. What Proposition tries to tell you is that you can only have one. What we get to do is have our cake and eat it. We say not only can you have both, but you can have many, many more than two solutions to this problem. A couple of things about sustainable development, because it's my pet topic at the moment. Through my work, I've been involved in the sustainable development negotiations, so I know very, very well the last 17 goals that we've created. We want to talk about negotiation styles, and you want to talk about us not being able to have this white man's burden, that's a terrible thing. We have to look at how governments respond to these questions as well, because this is not just a narrative that can be perpetuated by media or by songs or by anything else, but by governments themselves. So when the African group in the United Nations turns around to traditionally Western countries and goes, we want you to bankroll our development because it is a white man's creation. There's the very same perpetuation of the exact same problems that we've heard throughout the floor speeches, throughout the proposition, that we should not be allowed to have. This is a much bigger problem than Band-Aid could ever be there to set out in the first place, or indeed solve when it happened, which comes back entirely to the case that we offer you on opposition, which is, this is not the responsibility of two musicians who wanted to do good, and indeed did do quite a lot of good. We beg to oppose.
Thanks for that great summary speech from opposition. And now to summarise their own sides' arguments and indeed the debate as a whole, can I get the proposition summary speakers?
Thank you. I like it too.
Do you know his person?
Yes. Look, we obviously don't regret the fact that 150 million US dollars went to people in need. But the point is that that was not the only way that those two people could have made that concert happen. There are plenty of other ways they could have done it, involving not releasing that song, or in all sorts of other concerts. Like, they have to defend that particular single released in that particular way. What we have to defend is those people doing something else. When Fletch says, oh, they could have done it better, therefore you can't regret the thing they did. Yes, of course we can. That's the point. Look, we tell you that the single and the way it was released meant that all the development aims that are most important fell by the wayside because people viewed Africa and all the countries in Africa, all the crises and suffering in a particular way, so that they are less likely to make money. When Fletch tells you, oh, how I get this too, no, people only have a certain amount of money to give. When they choose to give it to one thing over the other, that means that people's lives over the long run are harmed. The second thing is that we told you is that the fact that it keeps getting re-released year after year means that the only story, and I don't like the word narrative, but the story is a better word, the only story that people get told is this is what the problem is, and this is how you solve the problem, which, as all sides and all speakers admit, is patently false. The way you solve the problem is through long-term development aid. And so when the most powerful group of people, the people who make entertainment, who listen to your iPod every morning on the tube tell you that this is the way you solve the problem, then you believe them. What they could do is do something else. They could have a concert and sponsor other charities. They could sponsor acquisitions. And all those things are independent of one another. So you don't have one concert. You can't have all these things. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. So at the end of this debate, ask yourself, what could those two people have done instead of the things they did? And why would it have been better than to just hold the concert and say we're donating money to this crisis, as opposed to create a song that imagined a world that frankly was patronising and not the way to solve the problem.
So also, further to this, I did only have 7 minutes, which is why I do agree. I refer to Africa as a homogenous nation and the West as homogenous. I could have told you about how the top 4 future economies next year are predicted to be Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Mozambique. I could have questioned the aptness of a Christmas song for Ebola when the countries were predominantly Muslim. And I could have described how Fuse ODG, a Ghanaian singer, questioned the lyrics of how joy and happiness are mutually exclusive from Western Africa, because that's the only reason he ever goes back. My issue with this single, again, is not the fact that money was raised. I think we keep saying that it brings Africa to the forefront of the conversation. But whose conversation? Conversation in the West. I hate to use that nebulous phrase, but like it is a conversation in the West. And it's the same tired, outdated conversation that disincludes Africans themselves and takes away their agency. Do we ever stop to think that actually maybe they could have done more to encourage this conversation within Africa? I think it's more the long-term insidious impact of the Band-Aid single over time that is the issue. We're not saying that alone it's caused systemic problems and failures that various countries in Africa have faced. We are saying it does highlight how it skewed our perceptions of Africa, of being symptomatic of this persistent notions that Africa is a failing continent. It kind of like undermines the successes of Africa in a way that a patronizing older sibling like indulgently talks about a younger child. And like at the end of the day, these patronizing shallow lyrics damage Africa, not because poverty, famine, and conflict phase us. Those are just part and parcel of our news now. It's because that conversation infantilizes Africa and it stops Africa from being taken seriously. Now, I would definitely argue that these musicians had much more of a duty in the way that they tried to raise money. The West, or I'll make it more relevant, Britain and America, have in the past very severely helped out countries such as the Southeast Asian countries that they deemed worthy of their help for their GDP in terms of helping invest in trade. Why couldn't something similar have been done within Africa as opposed to trying to stick on a band-aid?
Thank you to the opposition and the proposition, summary speeches and everything they did to make our debate come to a close and to clarify all those final issues within our minds. As a reminder, next week we don't have a debate because we're all in Christmas land, but once we're back from that lovely sunny place, our next debate is on Where is it? Our next debate on the 11th of January is this House would make all pornography illegal. That's going to be a very fun one, very interesting one. I encourage everyone here to turn out for that as well because it's going to be great. And thank you for everyone who turned out to this, who resisted the pull of the deadlines to expose their minds to all rushing arguments. Now, just before we descend into rabble, I'm going to take the final vote as we took the first vote. So we can get my two volunteers stamped again, to go to the room again. And now, who, after seeing and hearing everything that we've seen here tonight, would say that they're in proposition on this motion? Who regrets the release of the Band-Aid motion?
Wait, no.
No. Okay, everyone's sure?
No.
Going once.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking.
And now the other thing on sale tonight, we have opposition. Who opposes this motion? Who does not now regret the release of the Band-Aid symbol? And the final position you can take, abstaining. Abstaining means you're not sure, you put yourself in the centre, undecided for whatever reason. Who abstains on this motion? Okie dokie. Thanks for those. Count it up again. Before we announce the result, Before we announce the results of the vote, I have the results of the floor speech first. So we had some really high quality speeches tonight, despite only getting through 2 rounds of them. I think every one of them was excellent. So it was a hard decision to make. In the end, we have to settle on one person. And so the person who we settled on as making the best speech that contributed the most to interesting ideas was, in the end, Sophie. Which phrase are you looking for? Okay. One last thing. After I'm done announcing the results of the vote, we'll make our way to our regular social venue, the bar at TCR, to continue our debate in a less formal setting. We'd be delighted if you'd like to dodge the deadlines for a few hours more and join us there for our 10% discount. One other thing about society, we're at the moment running a couple of surveys to find out how, in general, you think society is running and how you think our training sessions are running. So go on our Facebook group, look at them if you have strong opinions, or indeed any opinions on what you want to see next term, because we will take the feedback and we will improve hopefully on that. So, before we held this debate, before you heard everything from the speaker before you, the votes were as follows. We had in opposition 4 votes. We had in abstention 7 votes, and in proposition we had 9 votes. I don't think everyone in the room voted, but everyone who came engaged, so that's great. What am I saying? After we heard the arguments, then we had in proposition 4 votes. We had in abstention 5 votes, and in opposition we had, making it to the heady heights of double figures, 10 votes. Proposition lost 5 and opposition gained 6. So I think we can say that opposition won the day. Thank you.